네, 여러분 스페이스십
Please welcome Eve Perlman from Spaceship Media.
Hello. Thank you for having me here today. I'm deeply honored to be here with you. I feel tremendously lucky to have an opportunity to talk about Spaceship Media's work, what we call dialogue journalism, and the ideas that guide it. As an aside, I want to share with you an old family story about chicken soup, but more on that later. We're all here today because we care about the fabric of society and changing times. And my hope is that as I talk about my work, it will in some way be useful or informative to you as you think about your own work and the challenges you face. My life is dedicated to the task of reimagining journalism. So I ask myself, how can we as journalists adapt our practice to better serve people and give them the information they need to live their lives? And I also ask, how can we as journalists make sure we respond as holistically as possible to the complex realities of the changing information ecosystems in which we live? We all know this world. We live in a time in which nefarious digital actors are working to sabotage genuine communication and connection. And we live in a world in which increasingly people do not trust journalists or institutions or even each other. And we live in a world in which people have many ways of receiving information and engaging with it on apps and on phones and podcasts and memes. And we also live in this world in which newspapers are no longer simply handing down information to a receiving public. We're all sharing this. Spaceship Media's work goes to the heart of three interlinked problems: the decline in trust in journalism, the deepening of polarization, and the decentralization of power. It's essential as we think about these issues to remember always that facts are not enough. Because I, as a journalist, can offer you facts about climate change or the economy or pensions or about any of the issues that matter to us globally and regionally. But without relationships, without trust, without connection, without social contract, none of these facts matter. People don't believe things just because you tell them they should, and they don't believe journalists simply because you want them to. Relationships will always come before trust. Trust is earned, always. I see and talk to journalists all the time who feel embattled and mistrusted, and very often I see in their impulse to protect themselves that they double down on facts. They back themselves into corners of certainty. But this will not help us. Without relationships built on respect and empathy, people cannot listen to one another, and they cannot trust the reporting of journalists. So at Spaceship, we work very hard always to be transparent, to be open, to be human, to be authentic, to build connection between the divided communities we serve. And this mindset is what guides our work of bringing people together for conversation about divisive social and political issues. And it guides our work as we provide people with reporting. So I want to show you now a short video about dialogue journalism. You'll hear about our method and also from some of the participants in our groups.
We're in a really difficult political moment right now. People are not in the habit of talking with one another across social and political lines, and we're really isolated in separate news and information ecosystems.
People are becoming less and less interested in understanding one another, and that's a problem because it creates a lack of trust. A lack of trust in each other, a lack of trust in journalism, a lack of trust in facts.
Spaceship Media was born out of a desire to solve that problem, to bridge divides, to go to the heart of social and political fault lines and build meaningful conversation across difference. And that is how dialogue journalism was born.
When we partner with an organization, we work with newsroom leaders and reporters to figure out what issues are most divisive for their audiences. And we create a plan to build meaningful discourse around those issues.
Just days after the 2016 presidential election, we dove in together and I watched this incredible new form of journalism begin to come to life. Spaceship Media began to grow a model which would later become called dialogue journalism, which allowed me to think about what is the next role for journalists in America? What are ways that as a central point of what we do, we can bring people together in ways that they can't necessarily find on their own?
I went into it primarily because I realized that I didn't know anyone who would publicly acknowledge that they had voted for our president.
In this election, there were stories talking about people who had voted for Trump in the election and what they hoped to get out of it. And so it was about me, talking about me. And they were lies.
By creating a new news cycle, one that starts with the issues and questions that are important to the divided communities we bring together in conversation, we've seen that real, nuanced, thoughtful, respectful dialogue is indeed possible.
You know, whenever we would get like entrenched in something, the reporters would be like, hold on a minute, let's do some reporting. Let's go back and do some research, and then they would come back with some facts.
Even if we don't change our minds about our subject matter, we change our mind about the people that we disagree with. At that point, we become connected with them. We had a conversation instead of a debate.
And to see this taking root in journalism, and to feel that there's a place for this in an American newsroom, in a newsroom across the world, gives me a different kind of hope for journalism than I ever had.
So I'll take a few moments now to explain the mechanics of dialogue journalism, but I first want to talk about what kind of journalism that we're not doing. We're not going to each side and quoting a practiced partisan advocate and then playing them against each other. We're not amplifying conflict or tension in the pursuit of clicks or page views. With dialogue journalism, we slow things down and we put a community's need for facilitated conversation and reliable reporting at the center of our practice. But just like with regular journalism, we start with a polarizing topic. We've hosted conversations about immigration and gun control and race and public education. In every conversation, we ask regular people, people with a range of views and perspectives, if they are open to being part of a respectful conversation with people with whom they disagree. And then we always ask them 4 questions. We ask them, what do you want to know about the other side? What do you want the other side to know about you? What do you think about the other side? And what do you think the other side thinks about you? And we consistently find that these questions invite reflection and curiosity, and that they allow people to identify and then move through the first layers of stereotype and judgment, all those negative thoughts and ideas that separate them from one another. And then we build on this openness and empathy as we invite people to talk about their views and their stories and their values. And so we have a moderated conversation. And in each conversation, we set clear guidelines and we adhere to them. So no name calling, no insults, no personal attacks. And we ask people to think before they engage, to ask sincere questions, to assume the best of one another. And what it turns out is that when given support and space, most people know how to talk to one another with respect. We know how to be civil. And then when people start talking, we report in response to the questions and issues that arise in conversation. We think of this as a new news cycle, one that starts with the immediate information needs of the divided communities we serve. And because we are there authentically, hosting the conversation, moderating, responding, listening, we find people trust us and they trust our reporting. And they also begin to trust the goodwill of those with whom they disagree. And when people begin to trust, they can begin to hear one another. And they can begin to understand, and they can stop assuming all sorts of negative things about the other side, that they're stupid, that they're evil, that they're less than human. And in our work, we partner with established news organizations then to tell stories out of these conversations. And we work to tell stories with nuance and sensitivity and to represent a wide range of views to avoid amplifying polarizing divides. A lot of what we've seen and learned in 3 years of doing this work is pretty straightforward and pretty logical. And our learnings, I think, apply to citizens who hold opposing views, and they also apply to journalists who may sometimes see themselves as separate or superior to the communities they serve. We've learned that if you call people names, if you label them, if you insult them, they are not going to want to listen to you, to see your point of view. If you shame people, if you mock people, if you are condescending, it won't make people trust you and hear you. And this is true whether you are a journalist or whether you are an advocate for a particular policy or position. With dialogue journalism, we work to build the relationships that we know come before trust. And we work to report directly in service to the divided communities we serve. We work to add nuance and subtlety rather than deepen divides. And we work intently to adapt how we practice journalism to the realities of the world we live in today. I'd like to leave you with a family story. It was told to me by my father, who is 80 now. He's not 80 in the picture, about my grandmother, who would be 114. When my grandmother was a young woman in Brooklyn in the 1930s, my father's mother, Lillian, my grandmother, was in the kitchen with her friend, and they were making chicken soup together. And my grandmother, Lil, saw that her friend, Estelle, broke the long bones of the chicken, what we call the drumstick, before she put them in the pot. And she was watching her friend break the bones like this, and my grandma, Lil, asked Estelle why she broke the bones. And Estelle said she didn't know why, but that was how her mother had taught her to make soup. But that she said she would go and ask her mom why. And so the next week, Estelle asked her mother why she broke the bones, and her mother answered in the same way that Estelle had. I do it because my mother did it that way. But she said she would ask her own mom when she visited her in the senior center. And so the next week, Estelle's mom visited her mother, now very old, and she said, Mom, why did you break the bones of the chicken before you put them in the pot? And Estelle's grandmother thought a bit, and then she said, I broke them because we had a very small pot, and the chicken would not fit in whole. Traditions are wonderful things, but traditions do not always serve us in a changing world. Many of our journalistic traditions do not serve us now in this period of social, digital, and global and media upheaval. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from this talk, it's this understanding that to change journalism, you must innovate. You must think differently about how you do your things. So by which I mean, don't do things because you were told to. Don't do things because someone else told you to do it. Don't do things because that's the way they were always done. But you want to do things in response to the real world in which we live, into the real life experiences that you see, feel, and sense around you. And so I urge you to embrace that feeling of freedom in this chaotic moment of journalistic and media infrastructure. Thank you so much.